Hello everybody. So because of the break, I feel like a lot of us currently feel like we are in the 6th level of Impel down, where the boredom is almost unbearable. So hopefully this video will at least act as a distraction. This is a video where it's a topic that I've actually done a lot of research on. It's probably the mystery of One Piece that I'm the most invested in, at least currently. So it's about Blackbeard and his ability or his capacity to eat more than one devil fruit, but then also what his third and final devil fruit will be, or will be revealed to be. That being said, if this theory does not come true, I don't care, because I feel like it's a good enough theory that I want to share it, and I'm confident enough in the theory where I feel like at least certain aspects about what I'm about to say could fit perfectly into the story. So I want to start off with this picture that we get during Reverie. So we have 3 posters, right? 3 characters. So I want to start this off with a question, which is, what do these 3 characters have in common? Just think about that for a moment, and we'll come back to it later. The second thing is that in order to find out more about Blackbeard, we kind of have to look at some of the clues or hints that Oda has dropped about his character, throughout the series. And so we kind of have to look at the miscellaneous here. And so all of this is information from the SBS sections of the manga volumes of the series. The One Piece wiki was kind enough to organize it for us, so we have this list here. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the first place is because I feel like ultimately, once we get an answer to Blackbeard's secret, all of this information has to connect to each other, right? All of these dots have to connect for us to be like, oh, that makes sense. And so I want to start off with the fact that Oda said that if Teach were an animal, he would be a hippopotamus. So if we look at the cover for chapter 19, we'll see a hippopotamus there with a devil fruit spiral on its face, along with Luffy. Now the chapter itself is about Buggy and his grudge against Shanks because Shanks kind of accidentally made him eat a devil fruit. So if we take that into consideration, in addition with the cover, you can technically say that chapter 19 is the first chapter of the series that in a way features all 4 current emperors. Now in ancient Egypt, the animal of the hippopotamus had a pretty strong connection with the sun, because one of the things that hippos do is that they roar in the morning at sunrise, and they also roar in the evening at sunset. And so according to metmuseum.org, the Egyptians viewed this behavior as the hippopotamus saying hello and goodbye to the sun. Now because the sun rises and sets repeatedly, the cycle is seen as a cycle of rebirth that people who die hope to join. And so because the behavior of the hippopotami was sort of seen as being influenced by the sun, the hippopotami also became associated with life, regeneration, and rebirth. To the point where people would place little hippopotamus figures on tombs in order to make sure that the deceased would find their way in the afterlife, and that way they would be able to be reborn again, or reincarnate. In addition, the Egyptians also feared the hippopotamus because the hippopotamus was associated with chaos. And even now in Africa, hippopotamus actually end up killing more people than any other large animal. Another thing that we know about hippos is that they have 3 stomachs, or rather, they have stomachs with 3 chambers in them. And so this kind of fits the rule of 3 theme that Blackbeard has to his character. Now I feel like I'm beating a dead horse just repeating this because I'm sure everybody already knows this, but just in case, his Jolly Roger has 3 skulls. He also has 3 flintlocks, 3 pistols on his waist. His beard is separated into 3. In one of the early drafts for his character, Oda was going to have Blackbeard have 2 sisters, which means that he would be one of 3 children. His birthday is on the 3rd of August. He also gave Shanks 3 scars. You get the picture. Now the next point here is Blackbeard's flower resemblance. And so Oda points out, or he connects Blackbeard to the red spider lily. And so just to give you an example of how important this information is, Oda also said, or at one point also connected Luffy to the sunflower. Now why the red spider lily for Teach? Well, the first reason is that these flowers are typically planted in Japan. They're typically planted around grave sites or in cemeteries. And the reason for that is because they are poisonous, and so they keep animals away from meddling with the corpses. Another name for the red spider lily is Higambana in Japanese, and that means the other shore of the Sansu River. And according to Japanese tradition, the Sansu River is a river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. So when somebody passes away, when somebody dies, it is said that they must cross the Sansu River, and there are only 3 ways to do so. And so depending on how good you were when you were alive, is the path that you are allowed to take.
So if you were good, you get to cross through a bridge to the other side. If you were sort of like so-so, like just kind of okay, average, you actually have to step into the water, but you get to cross through the shallows. So it's kind of like an easy way across. Not as easy as the bridge, but you get the idea. And then if you were bad, you actually get thrown into the depths of the river, where there's snakes and monsters and stuff. Now, from what I understood, once you cross to the other side, you'll find a path of red spider lilies. And so it's said that these flowers are sort of there to guide souls into the afterlife. And you've probably already seen this flower in a bunch of other anime, specifically anime that have something to do with the afterlife or death or reincarnation. Like Demon Slayer is a perfect example. You see them, in the anime. And so aside from being called Higambana, the red spider lily has a bunch of other names. Here are some examples. So poisonous flower, dead person flower, ghost flower, abandoned child flower, which is very fitting for Teach because we know that he's an orphan, and then also hell flower. So this is kind of funny. I'm looking at volume 95. And this one has the SBS section where Oda says what flower and what animal like each member of the worst generation is. And this is funny because so a fan asks, "Hello, Oda Sensei. I would like to know the flower and animal that you associate with each member of the worst generation." And then Oda says, "Okay, I don't know much about flowers, so I'm not looking up their special flower meanings or anything." It's like, come on, like he's being a troll. He's totally pretending that he doesn't know the meaning of what Luffy being a sunflower and what Teach being a red spider lily is going to mean. So that's a huge hint from him, right? It's kind of like him saying like, don't look at this, because if you do, you might find something out. Now I'm going to be bringing up these 2 points up again by the end of the video, but just to be able to move on for right now. So we have the animal of the hippo, which we know has some connection with the sun, right? Egyptians saw this. There's some connection with the sun, and there's also some kind of connection with the hippo and the afterlife. And when it comes to the red spider lily, there's not a whole lot of connection there, like lore-wise with the sun, but there is a connection there with death and the afterlife. In fact, I was reading like a blog from a Japanese lady, and she was talking about how when she was younger, like the adults would tell her not to touch the red spider lilies because they were bad, they were evil. And so at one point when she was a little girl, she just got too curious, so she grabbed the flower, broke its stem, and took a whiff at it, right? She wanted to smell the flower, and she was like, yeah, this smells like death. Like this smells like something died. So again, red spider lily is supposed to be the flower of death, the flower of hell, the flower of the afterlife.
Another very important thing to remember is that Teach's body was already special. It was already different and weird even before he ate the Yami Yami no Mi. We know this for 2 reasons. Number 1 is because during the Oden flashback, we find out that he doesn't sleep. And then Marco says in Marineford that Teach's body is different. And so Marco saying this at this point in the story means that Teach's body had to be different even before he stole the Yami Yami no Mi from Thatch, because Blackbeard essentially stole the devil fruit and then left the crew. So Marco knew about Teach's body from before he ate the Yami Yami no Mi, which means that the reason for why Teach can have more than one devil fruit power has to be independent from the Yami Yami no Mi. And so I strongly believe that the reason for why Blackbeard can eat more than one devil fruit is because he ate a mythical type Zoan that allows him to do so. And just like Luffy, I think he ate the fruit when he was very young. Think about it this way. Oda said that he wants to make adjustments so that he can finish the series as soon as possible, which means that we're going to be entering a speed run towards the end. So if at this point in the story, Blackbeard still doesn't have his third and final devil fruit, if he still doesn't have his Zoan power, then that means that we're going to have to wait for him to get it, and then he also has to get used to the power. And so that would be stretching the series out even more. It would mean investing valuable time on something that I think, given Oda's comments, Oda doesn't want to spend time on anymore. Now, before I tell you which mythical type Zoan I think Blackbeard has, I want to start off with a story. So this is a story that a lot of people I think just kind of dismiss, or I think we forget, but it's 100% canon. It's in the manga. We actually learn about it right before the Straw Hats get to Fishman Island, and that is the story of Vanderdecken and the Flying Dutchman. So Brooke actually says that this story, this tale, actually started several centuries ago. Now, due to chronological reasons that I will be discussing later, I'm pretty sure that this story had to happen before the Void Century. And so according to Brooke, the legend goes like this. Several centuries ago, the captain of the Flying Dutchman, whose name was Vanderdecken, went crazy. He went mad during a storm and started throwing his crew members into the sea. And after all of his crew members were dead, he actually also cursed the gods. Now, because this is all pre-Void Century stuff, it's important to remember that back then, the people that were known as gods were the Lunarians. And so because Vanderdecken spat in the face of God, he brought the wrath of God on himself and was cursed to wander the seas forever while suffering eternal torture. So very similar to Sunisha, the Flying Dutchman is a ship that cannot dock anywhere. It is cursed because of the crimes of his captain to wander the seas endlessly
forever. So it's not exactly like the elephant's curse, but it's very similar to it, which makes sense given that it appears that the same people are responsible for putting those curses on the elephant and on the Flying Dutchman. Another reason for why this story must have happened pre-Void Century is because Vanderdecken the Ninth, which is the character that we see in Fishman Island, says that the first Vanderdecken, his ancestor, the one from the legend, heard about there being a mermaid princess that could speak to the Sea Kings, and so that's why he went to find her to the bottom of the ocean, to Fishman Island. And so we know that that mermaid princess and Joy Boy knew each other, because Joy Boy made a promise to her that he couldn't keep, so there was a message inscribed with an apology in one of the poneglyphs in Fishman Island. And so we know that Joy Boy was pre-Void Century, and so that means that Nika/Joy Boy, the Mermaid Princess, and Vanderdecken the First, all three of them must have lived during the same time, which again would be pre-Void Century.
Now I want to take this moment to make a brief clarification. So in Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Disney actually took the creative liberty of combining two different legends into one. So basically they had the Flying Dutchman that appears in the movies, but they made Davy Jones the captain of the Flying Dutchman. And in real world legends, like in real world folklore, that's not the case. Vanderdecken is actually the captain of the Flying Dutchman, and Davy Jones is his own thing. So Disney just decided to combine those two things into one. And so it's very important to keep this distinction in mind, that those are two different myths as we move forward, because just like Luffy has the Nika Nika no Mi, or the mythical type Zoan Hito Hito no Mi model Nika double fruit, I strongly believe that Blackbeard has the mythical type Zoan Hito Hito no Mi, or human fruit model Davy Jones.
Now, I know at first this may sound like a very wild idea that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I promise that if you stay with me, I'll make it worth your time by the end of this. So the first thing we need to address here is, does Davy Jones actually exist within the One Piece world as a myth? So did he exist as a myth, yes or no? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, not only is he mentioned by name during the Foxy arc, but the name of the game which is played during that arc, which of course we know is the Davy Back Fight, is also named after Davy Jones himself. Now, in case you haven't seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you may be wondering, who is Davy Jones? So in real world folklore, or in real world mythology, Davy Jones is also known as the Devil of the Sea. So the way the story goes is that if somebody dies at sea, then their soul belongs to Davy Jones, or it goes into Davy Jones's locker, which is located at the very bottom of the sea, kind of like sea hell in a way. So when pirates or sailors drown, it's said that they've gone to join Davy Jones, right? Or that Davy Jones now presides over their soul. In a very old novel that came out in 1751, which is named The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, Davy Jones is described as the monster that you see there on your left. And what's interesting about this description is that the book says that Davy is supposed to have 3 rows of teeth. Moving on, question number 2. Or whatever question we're on at this point. I don't know. Do you fear death?
Do you fear death?
So that's obviously the line that Davy Jones says during his introduction, during the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Dead Man's Chest. And so I'm bringing this up because it's a pretty well-known fact that the members of the family of D are pretty well known for not fearing death. And we've got numerous examples throughout the series of people from the D clan smiling in the face of death and actually sort of embracing the possibility that their life might be over. Not because they want to die, but because they've lived a great life, a life of no regrets. And so when their time comes, to quote Hermione, they kind of greet death as an old friend. So the people of the D clan do not fear death, or at least they've been shown not to be fearful of death, except for one. And that one person that is afraid of death is Blackbeard, and we clearly see this at Marineford. When Whitebeard is busy wiping the floor with him, he is really scared that he might die. Now, in the beginning of this video, I showed you a shot of Eternal Hell, or level 6 of Impel Down. And as we know, Impel Down is a structure that goes all the way down to the bottom of the sea. So the worst criminals are actually kept at the very bottom. And so again, Davy Jones's locker is also synonymous with the bottom of the sea. And so we know that at one point during Marineford, Blackbeard actually goes down there and he offers the level 6 prisoners a deal. He basically tells them, since you guys are basically trapped here forever and you're just kind of, sitting around waiting to die, I'm going to offer you an opportunity to escape. So fight amongst yourselves, and then whoever's left can be free by joining my crew. So that's what Teach tells them, and then this is what Davy Jones says to a group of men who also got stuck out at sea and are also waiting to die.
Join my crew and postpone the judgment.
Another thing that we find out about Teach in Impel Down is that he believes in God. He basically says that whether him and his crew survive is actually up to God, and that all you can do is just live in the moment. And so again, we know from chapter 1023 from Marco that when Whitebeard would get drunk, he would talk about the land of gods that existed at the top of the red line, way before Marijoa came into existence. So again, pre-Void Century stuff. Now, before we found out about Luffy's awakening, I established in one of my videos that perhaps Long Ring Longland had been a place where Joy Boy had used his awakening in the past. And the reason for this is because the vegetation there and some of the animals are all stretched out, almost as if they had been granted the ability to stretch by Joy Boy, right? Which we know is actually a property of Luffy's Devil Fruit awakening, because he kind of manipulates Kaido's body and turns it into a jump rope and does all that crazy stuff with it. Also, the One Piece wiki states that the reason for why the animals grow so long is because they are able to live freely without any restraints. And so we know that freedom, or the ideal of living freely, is like one of the values of Joy Boy. Now, the Foxy arc by itself is a pretty fun arc, but for the most part, I think the fandom kind of agrees that like when you watch it or when you're done with it, you're like, how does this affect the overall story? Like, what did we learn from this, or what kind of things can we take away from this? And so if this theory turns out to be true, in addition to Aokiji and Zoro and Sanji teaming up, we can also value the Foxy arc for being the first arc in the series that depicted the influence and impact that two legendary characters, in this case Davy Jones and Joy Boy, had over the world of One Piece. So Joy Boy influenced the world his way, and then Davy Jones left like this game that has been played for generations after his passing. And so of course during the arc we get a scene where Robin is explaining to Chopper who Davy Jones was. And so of course it's Robin because, she studies history and she's the archaeologist. And so that takes me back to this list that I showed you in the beginning of the video that basically states that if Teach had a real life profession, he would be an archaeologist, and his hobbies include gambling and history. And so of course we know that participating in a Davy Back Fight is the ultimate gamble because you risk losing crew members. Now, the myth of Davy Jones was actually so important to Oda that he decided to address it again after the Foxy arc in an SBS for volume 38. And so in that section, Oda says that even though there are different versions of the story, in general, Davy Jones was a lying, greedy pirate that was famous for putting all the crew's valuables into his own locker. Oda then goes on to say that Davy Jones was so wicked, even for a pirate, that one day the devil himself cursed Davy Jones to live at the bottom of the sea. So who is the devil that cursed Davy Jones? Well, we know that because of the Void Century, legends and myths in One Piece sometimes get misconstrued, people misinterpret them, or they get blown out of proportion. And so of course we know that the family of D, sometimes is referred to as the natural enemy of God. And so the enemy of God would be kind of like the devil. So just like the curse on Sunisha and the curse on the Flying Dutchman, maybe it was somebody from the D clan who cursed Davy Jones. Now what's interesting is that in the SBS, Oda describes Davy Jones as being very greedy. And so as punishment, he collects all of the sunken treasure lost at sea and places it into his locker, but then he never gets access to the treasure because the treasure gets lost, essentially, inside of the locker. The treasure never gets seen again. So it's kind of like he's sending treasure into the void. Now Shanks at one point refers to devil fruits as being treasures of the sea. And we know that Blackbeard, his Yami Yami no Mi, is capable of absorbing devil fruit powers. He even says that his darkness power is the ability to turn everything into nothing. And so this could serve to explain why Blackbeard tells Ace that the power of the Yami Yami no Mi chose him. It's the perfect Logia power to go with his mythical type Zoan. Also, in the very first scene of the series where Oda talks about what happens to a person that eats more than one devil fruit, Lucci says that greedy idiots end up destroying themselves. Because if you think about the consequence of eating just one fruit, then you can only imagine what the consequence is for eating more than one fruit. And so because of this, I really wouldn't be surprised if before Luffy fights Blackbeard, we get a Skypiea-type flashback, except instead of it being about Calgara and Noland, it will be about Joy Boy and Davy Jones. Now, my imagination has suffered irreparable damage ever since I jumped out of a bus and hit my head, but if I'd had to guess, I'm thinking their story would go a little bit like this. A very long time ago, there was a kingdom at the top of the Red Line, and the people who lived there were called Lunarians because they came from the moon. They were a special race that created devil fruits, and so eventually people started calling them gods. Now, a famous sailor from down below, named Davy Jones, heard about the Lunarians and the special treasures they kept that granted people power. So one day he decided to climb up the Red Line to be able to snatch one of these treasures for himself. Atop of the Red Line, Davy Jones met Joy Boy, who actually admired Davy's tenacity and determination. And so because of this, Joy Boy said to Davy Jones, "Okay, Davy Jones, you came all the way up here. I'll give you permission to take one fruit from the sacred tree for yourself. But just one. But Davy Jones's greed was too much for his own good. So instead of taking just one fruit, he actually ended up taking 3. 1 Logia, 1 Zoan, and 1 Paramecia. Now before Davy could make his escape, the gods caught him, and so Davy Jones was to be punished for his crimes. So Joy Boy had to think long and hard about a sentence that would fit Davy Jones's crime. Now think about it like this. If the punishment for having 1 devil fruit is that you can't swim, and the consequence for having 2 devil fruits is death, then logically, the punishment for stealing 3 fruits from the gods has to be worse than death. Now, in the beginning of the 3rd Pirates of the Caribbean movie, the main cast actually goes into Davy Jones' locker to be able to save Jack Sparrow, who's been trapped inside. And so as the characters make their way into the locker, one of the pirates asks Calypso, who is supposed to represent the sea, why she can't just revive Jack Sparrow like she did with Barbossa. And so Calypso says this. She says, "Because Barbossa was only dead. Jack Sparrow is taken body and soul to a place not of death, but of punishment. The worst fate a person can bring upon himself, stretching on forever. That's what awaits at Davy Jones' locker." And so after thinking about it for a while, this is what Joy Boy came up with. He said, "The crime of stealing 3 devil fruits from us has to be punishable with something worse than death. And because we Lunarians value dreams and living freely above all else, that's what we're going to take away from you. From this day forward, as long as the sun and moon are in the sky, you will not be able to find rest. You will never be able to fall asleep again, which means that you will also never be able to know what it's like to dream again." Now, hearing his punishment, Davy Jones mocked and laughed at Joy Boy's sentence. He said, "Jonesy, ha 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 ha. Joy Boy, you and your friends might be able to sentence me to a life of no rest, just like you did with the elephant and the Flying Dutchman. However, despite me not being able to sleep ever again, you will never be able to stop me from dreaming. And that's because the dreams of men will never end." Now, eventually the world government rose to power, and they ended up destroying both Davy Jones and Joy Boy. The 2 of them became myths, and as a result, 2 new Zoan mythical type devil fruits were born, one for Joy Boy and the other one for Davy Jones. Now, just like Sugar's devil fruit, which is pretty broken but carries with it the consequence of permanently halting the user's growth, Davy Jones's Mythical Zoan devil fruit allows the user to eat 2 more fruits after that one, but then causes the user not to be able to sleep ever again.
In the beginning of the video, I talked a little bit about Vanderdecken the Ninth and how his ancestor within the world of One Piece was actually Vanderdecken the First. And so Vanderdecken the First was the real, mythological captain of the Flying Dutchman, right? So we know about Vanderdecken's ancestor. However, within the same arc, we also get introduced to the character of Hody Jones, whose name is obviously a reference to Davy Jones. But what's really strange about that is that unlike with Vanderdecken, where we actually learn about his past ancestor, we learn absolutely nothing about Hody Jones's ancestry, right? It's almost as if Oda didn't want to make that connection between Davy and Hody because maybe he's going to save Davy for something else.
I also think it's worth noting that young Hody Jones's design is very similar to young Teach's design. It's just too much of a coincidence for me. Another connection we can make between Blackbeard and Davy Jones is rocks. See, just like it turns out that Roger had inherited Joy Boy's will, I'm pretty sure that Zebek was also in a way following Davy Jones's footsteps. Because not only do we know that the Rocks pirates were formed on this island, Hashinosu or Fuloled Island, but we also know that this is the island that gave birth to the Davy Back Fight. And it's also the island that Blackbeard decided to use as headquarters. Also, the shape of the rock on the island is very similar to the drawing that Oda did of Davy Jones in the SBS section I told you about. And so the aspect of inherited will between Davy Jones and Joy Boy also comes in threes. And so this is what it looks like, right? So it goes Davy, Sebek, Teach, and then Joy Boy, Roger, and Luffy on the other side. So the 2 of them are destined to clash. Now, this next bit of information that I found during my research shocked me, and it involves the meaning behind the name Davy Jones. So let's start with Jones. So the name Jones comes from Jonah, and Jonah is a prophet that appears in the Bible, and he's famous for disobeying the will of God. Basically, God tells Jonah that he has to go to this city, Nineveh, and so Jonah says no way. So he tries to escape God by going on a ship and sailing away. But then during the voyage, God sends a storm, so the sea goes crazy, and Jonah is actually kind of forced to jump overboard. And so once he jumps into the sea, he gets swallowed by a giant fish. Now guess how many days Jonah spends in the belly of the fish? Yep, you guessed it, 3 days. And this is also later referenced by Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew when he says that it'll essentially take him 3 days to resurrect.
And so not only does this go along with Blackbeard's rule of 3 or theme of 3 that he has to his character, but also in the world of One Piece, there's a lot of lore, pre-Void Century, important lore that has biblical references to it. So for example, we have the Eve tree, or the sunlight tree Eve. We have the Adam tree, Adam and Eve. We have devil fruits that come from trees, or I'm assuming come from trees, and the forbidden fruits. We have Noah, which is an ark in Fishman Island, which was also pre-Void Century. And so the story of Jonah would go perfectly with all of these references as well.
Finally, we have the name Davy, which, according to my research, is sort of the bastardization or the misconstruction of the word Duffy, which is the West Indian term for ghost. Now, I'm pretty sure I don't need to point out how obvious it is that if you remove the D from Duffy and add an L in the middle, you get D-Luffy. But what's even crazier is that the word is supposed to come from West India. So if you look at a map and you go west from India, you'll find Somalia, which is exactly the place that Oda said Blackbeard would be from if he were from the real world.
Now I would like to head into the concluding part of this video with a brief set of trivia. How many rules do pirates have to swear on before they can start a Davy Back Fight? 3. In the manga, how many possible rounds can a Davy Back Fight have? 3. How many coins does Foxy throw into the ocean to commemorate the start of the Davy Back Fight in honor of Davy Jones? I think you get the picture by now.
Another thing I found during my research about the red spider lily is that the flower has a pretty strange blooming cycle, because apparently the flower appears to die twice in its lifetime. The first one is before it blooms. It actually looks dead, and then it just kind of looks like it comes back to life.
So you know how Kaido was telling Luffy that his Devil Fruit awakening was kind of weird because it had features of a Zoan awakening, but also features of a Paramecia? So I feel like maybe something similar is the case with the Davy Jones fruit, where it's technically a Zoan, it's a mythical type Zoan, but then it also has features of a Paramecia Devil Fruit, a Paramecia that would be similar to Brook's Devil Fruit. Brook's Devil Fruit actually looks like a skull, so it's kind of funny that, Teach's Jolly Roger has 3 skulls in it. So maybe the Paramecia type effect of Teach's Devil Fruit allows him to have more than one soul inside of his body, and so maybe those souls belong to Davy and Sebek. It also wouldn't be the first time for a mythical type Zoan Devil Fruit to be able to grant its user some degree of immortality. I mean, we got Orochi, who was also a mythical type Zoan, and the only way to get rid of him was to kill him 8 times.
So maybe when Luffy meets Teach and Jaya for the first time and he says that it's not him, but they, maybe it's because both him and Zoro could sense that there was another presence inside of him. Remember, Zoan Devil Fruits are supposed to have a will of their own, so maybe, just maybe. And so to answer the question that I asked in the beginning of the video, Shirahoshi is the reincarnation of the Mermaid Princess / Poseidon, Luffy is the reincarnation of Joy Boy / Nika, and Blackbeard would be the reincarnation of Davy Jones. I suspect Imu already knows this and absolutely hates this.
Now I know some of you guys might not like this idea because it's going into the whole chosen one territory. And while I agree that it doesn't really fit Luffy's character or character theme, I think the idea of predestination and fate does go along very well with Blackbeard's character, because Blackbeard is supposed to be the opposite of Luffy, right? Luffy is supposed to be about freedom and changing the future and living life the way you want to live it. That was the case up until recently. But then Blackbeard has always been about like the opposite of that. So I do think that this fits Blackbeard's character a lot better than Luffy's character.
My freedom was forfeit long ago.
Also, Blackbeard has had bits of dialogue throughout the story that make it obvious that he believes in fate. Like, he talks to Ace and he says, the Yami Yami no Mi chose me. Like, I was destined to have it. In Impel Down, I showed you, he says, like, whether we live or die is not up to us. That's up to God. In Jaya, when Luffy and the crew escape and they go up to Skypiea, I think it's Burgess who's like really worried, and he's like, we need to go and catch Luffy. And I think it's Teach and Van Ogre who says, like, don't worry. As long as we stay on the Grand Line, our paths are meant to intersect eventually. So again, the whole predestination thing fits Blackbeard's character a lot better. Last but not least, I want to end this video in the same way that I started it, which is talking about hippos. So hippos, you know, they submerge into the water. They can stay underwater for quite a bit, right? But eventually they come back up to take air. And so I thought that was interesting because according to the research that I did, that behavior was also associated with death and rebirth, because it seems like they submerge, they sink, they die, and then they come back up. So they get reborn in a way. And so in Pirates of the Caribbean, the crew goes into Davy Jones's locker to be able to get Jack Sparrow back, to bring him back to the land of the living. And so at one point, in order to go back to the land of the living, they actually have to sink the ship. They have to turn the ship upside down into the water. And then they have to wait till the sun goes down. And so once the sun goes down, the ship actually comes out of the water and they have reemerged into the land of the living. Very similar to what, like the myth of the hippo, right? Or that reference of the hippo sinking and coming back up for air. So yeah, there's too many connections between Teach and Davy Jones for them to be a coincidence, I think. So hopefully this video, you know, made a good argument of that, at least. Thank you so much for watching. I also hope that this video served to make the break a little bit more bearable. We're almost done with it, so yeah, we should be back pretty soon. Thank you for everything you do. This video did take me a lot of time, so if you could show this video your support, I would really appreciate it. You could also follow me on Instagram if you want to, at Team7Mage. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.